name is Hannah Howard, and I'm a research assistant at the Athens Institute for Education and Research in Athens, Greece. I'm here today with Dr. Trevor Harrison from Canada. How are you today?
I'm very good.
Great. Glad to hear. Very nice. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your education.
Yes, well, I'm, as you said, I'm from Canada. All of my degrees, all three of them, are in sociology.
Okay.
Over the years, I've specialized in different things. Right now, I'm a political sociologist and political economist. Much of my work actually is in studying large world systems and political and social movements. So this particular conference, I'm going to be presenting on the election of Donald Trump, but also putting that in the context of political developments in other countries. Mm-hmm. For example, Brexit, the upcoming French election, even what's been going on in Greece, kind of the disintegration of the centrist parties and the emergence of new kind of forms of political parties.
Sure.
So that's kind of the thing I've been doing over the years, but I also have very, very vast interests in a lot of different things.
Sure, okay. So how did you end up hearing about the Institute?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I first heard about it. I think it just came across my desk one day as here's this interesting conference. I thought, well, it'd be fun to go back to Greece. I actually first came to Greece when I was 20 years old. I can tell you I was not an academic. And my first time to Greece, I ended up going to Mykonos and staying in Mykonos for a month. Oh, wow. And I really have always enjoyed the Greek people, the culture, the music, the water, of course. And I've been back a few other times since, but the first time I came to Athens, when I saw there was an ad for this conference, and it seemed like a really interesting thing to come to, very interdisciplinary, and I thought, I've got to go back to it. So this is actually my 5th conference here.
Oh, wow.
And I've been back many times presenting on different things, and I've always really enjoyed it, enjoyed the people, and just to come back to Athens, come back to Greece is a wonderful opportunity.
Absolutely. So if it's your 5th conference, we obviously hooked you. But what about this specific conference made you want to come back again?
This conference, actually, I'm back partly because I'm also doing some other work. I have a sabbatical right now.
Oh, nice.
For 6 months. And so I've come back to actually interview and do some work with academics and also people who are non-academics in Greece. And I hope to interview them and meet them over the next while. So I'm doing basically some research, tying it in while I'm actually here at this conference.
Very nice. So how long will you actually end up being here?
Well, I've been here for about a week. I'm going to be here until the early part of June. In a couple of weeks, my wife, Sizagos Mu, is going to be joining me, and we will go out to our very favorite island, which is Naxos,
okay.
Where we have been on several occasions, and that will be my R&R for the year. And again, I'll just set aside as much as possible my academic hat for that.
Nice. Okay. Well, we're glad you got some academics with us under your belt before that vacation. Tell us a little bit more about your specific presentation that you are giving here.
Yeah, the presentation I was doing was looking at the last election, of course, the presidential election in 2016, and I started off by it was fascinating. I started out by saying actually that there was actually 3 candidates on the books. There was Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and none of the above. And that if a large number of Americans had had a choice, they may well have voted for none of the above. And so I talked about some of the problems that the American political system is, I think, facing right now. A lot of disenchantment with both mainstream parties, as was evidenced both with Donald Trump on the Republican side, but also Bernie Sanders on the Democrat side. So these are 2 parties that are losing a sense of legitimacy. But from there, I also wanted then to talk about why is this also happening, not just in the United States, but has happened in Britain. Again, we're likely seeing something like that in France. We've seen it here in Greece. We've seen it in Italy, that there's a growing kind of sense of disenchantment that mainstream political parties do seem, in the eyes of many people, to be representing only the elites. And so that's causing ripples throughout political systems everywhere. And that was kind of why I wanted to explore here.
Yeah, very interesting. So do you think you're going to get a lot of engagement on that presentation since we have people from some of those countries?
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually just finished it very few minutes ago here. I had a few questions, not as many as I might have actually thought, but I suspect I may also get some people following up by emails and everything. So,
Sure.
and it's always, for me when I present, the most interesting thing is the questions afterwards. I know what I'm going to present, but when I get good questions from other people, then it stimulates me to think about things differently, and that's the part of the engagement I really enjoy.
Sure. So did you get any new perspectives?
Yeah, there was a couple of interesting questions there that came up in terms of the whole Middle East, for example. A gentleman afterwards asked me about recent events in Syria, and it was kind of interesting insight because the individual was from one of the Middle Eastern countries and had a very different perspective on things. So
Sure.
it was interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, no, that's definitely a perk of these conferences.
Yeah.
What other research besides this kind of political movement and the rise, or rather fall, the fall of the mainstream and the rise of the fringe, I suppose is a way to look at it. What other kinds of research are you working
Well,
on?
I've done a lot of work actually on such things as just public policy issues, like
Okay.
what are good policies that people should, how do we restructure the welfare state for the 21st century? How do we look at new kinds of arrangements around workplaces and employment? I think there's going to be a significant change in labor markets around the world that I don't think our mainstream politicians, but also a lot of business leaders are not coming to terms with. Automation is going to make a major transformation. And so I think one of the things we have to look at is things such as retraining for sure, but redistribution of work hours. I think that actually the number of hours that people work per week is going to have to drop. We're going to have to distribute that work. We have to look at ways of distributing better the wages and incomes, because the gap between the very rich and the very poor is a real problem.
Sure.
There was a report just a few months ago that from Oxfam that the 8 richest people in the world own half of the world's wealth.
Wow.
This is not sustainable. Right? It's not sustainable economically, but politically it's also very dangerous. And so we need to rethink those things. And I think part of the reason that a lot of people are, and then you throw in the environmental issues, right? Part of the reason I think people are feeling disenchanted with mainstream political parties is because they don't see parties, governments, taking seriously or going after those hard issues, the big issues. They want to tinker at the margins, but not deal with things that are going to be really fundamentally important in this century.
Okay. Any of that research that you've been working on in the course of the period that you've started looking at it, have you seen any changes, or perhaps at least efforts at changes?
Yeah, I hear certainly I think there's a growing awareness among a lot of people, and really if you believe that it's really people at the grassroots, roots have to kind of lead these things. I do think there's a growing awareness about some of these kinds of issues. I hear people giving some mention to this, and sometimes actually it is people more in the corporate sector. I think large corporations who actually get it. They're concerned about what's going to happen. I don't expect we're going to see changes in the next couple of years, but I can see sort of the threads of the beginning of people thinking about some of these bigger issues.
Sure.
What kind of globalization are we going to have? A globalization that only supports a few, or a new form of globalization that is sensitive to a far wider range than we have had over the last 30 years? I think that is a fundamental question.
Okay, interesting. Just since you are a professor and a researcher, how do you think the education system is going to play into that dialogue?
Well, ultimately, there's, we're going through a period of discussing what is fact and what is truth, or reality or something. But ultimately, the way out for this is really through education.
Okay.
And the real hope is certainly young people who are coming up and becoming better educated, quite often through social media, being aware of a lot of things. But we also can't forget that we also really need to continue to educate and train and prepare people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. That's the other big issue. We're going to have a lot of people living for a long time. we have to think of how do they continue to be productive citizens who can participate fully in society. And education is basically a human right, but beyond a human right, it's also something that's fundamental to keeping society together. And so institutes like Athens promoting education as a public good is, I think, ultimately a really good thing also.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd have to agree. Well, thank you so much for presenting your research, for coming to be here with us in Athens for a 5th time, and we certainly hope that we'll see you again.
Thank you so much, Anna.